thank Rose, and I want to thank Kathleen, and I would like to point out that this is in fact a women-run organization. So as we celebrate some really outstanding women, of course the two I just mentioned and Laura, but I'd also like to point out that Kathleen's partner in crime, Susan Bass, is an old friend of mine and my classmate in college, and she was one of the stable, sensible, very smart, very nice people in my college class, and I think Sue deserves a huge hand. I'd also like to point out that, not to be redundant, but today is Earth Day, and I think we should thank Mother Earth on this day for what she's done for us, and her bounty and her beauty. And I'm looking around this room, I see so many people who are friends of mine, people who've contributed to this vital fight for so long and with such determination. So for all of you, this is your day too. Thank you for all the work you've done. It's been extraordinary. It's far from over. But, you know, today is the 52nd Earth Day, going back to Dennis Hayes. Dennis is such a fantastic, brilliant, kind, wonderful guy. And so this work, as a friend of mine said at a memorial service, if you can complete your life's work while you're alive, think bigger. Well, I think we can all say safely, we are thinking big enough because we're not going to solve this during our lives. This is an ongoing, something that was handed up to us to do the work and which we're going to hand on to the next generation to keep doing the work. So Earth Day was the beginning of the modern environmental movement. That was then. Our current crisis begins with climate, but it definitely doesn't end there. And it's important to start by telling the truth about where we stand. I think John Kerry tried very hard to do that. But if we have to frame this problem. And before we do that, I think it's absolutely essential that we always remember that the people and the countries and the communities who have contributed the least to this crisis have been and will continue to be hit the hardest and the worst. This is a crisis which, for me, has a human face. It is about ultimately avoiding human suffering, unimaginable human suffering. That is the point of the work. So as we think about and plan for the future, we have to start with, and we can never forget, justice. Because really that is the point of everything that we're doing. So with that lighthearted point, I'll give you some numbers, because I'm kind of a numbers guy. So here's one. According to an eminent research institute, which is actually the one that Secretary Kerry was referring to, which is the Potsdam Institute outside Berlin, if we continue to emit at our current rate, we will reach 1.5 C in 7 years and 3 months. So for everybody who thinks this is a 2050 problem, 7 years and 3 months. For us to hold the line at 1.5 C, the latest IPCC report estimates emissions have to peak by 2025. They have to be reduced by 43% by 2030, and they have to be reduced by 93% by 2050. So just to put that in context, we live in a world which has had 1 year in the last 200 when emissions went down, and that year was 2020, and they went down because of COVID. So when you think about where we are and the trajectory we're on, and what it is we're talking about actually accomplishing, it's a big deal. But those are just numbers. I think the right way to think about this is, fundamentally, we are destroying the natural order of things. And once they've started to deteriorate, when Secretary Kerry is talking about Greenland and Antarctica, how are you going to refreeze Greenland? How are you going to restore the Gulf Stream? How are you going to put the glaciers back in Glacier Park? or the Himalayas. So his point was, we're on the precipice of tipping points that will permanently transform our natural world. So it is a big task. But what he said about optimism is also true. We absolutely can get this done. And I want to talk about why that's true. But I don't think we can discuss this in Washington, D.C. about how we're going to overcome this crisis without acknowledging the political challenges we face today. We really can't win this without a functioning political system. And that may seem kind of hard to imagine right now. It is for me sometimes. But it is also in our economic interest as well as our human duty to solve this problem. We will make a lot of money doing this. And that's a good thing. So how are we going to do this? A robust and successful climate response requires a public-private partnership. And countries all around this world know that. And they are in a flat-out race to outbuild and out-innovate each other so they can lead the world's clean energy economy, so they can get the jobs, so they can get the growth, and so they can achieve global leadership. Between their disclosure rules and the carbon border adjustment, the EU is clearly on the public rulemaking, is leading on the public rulemaking around the world. We're definitely lagging. On the money side, between 2010 and 2020, China outspent the US by nearly 2-to-1 on energy transition-related investments, and they lead in renewable energy employment. But I'm an American. The US leads in innovation, and we are just getting revved up, particularly if we prioritize public-private collaborations. There will be times when the public sector has to lead, but there is a moment for the private sector to take the reins too. And just so you know, a little over a year ago, I started something called Galvanize Climate Solutions, which is a climate investment platform, because I believe for the execution and implementation phase, the private sector has to be the point of the spear. We have to work to innovate, accelerate, and scale bold climate solutions. And the private sector is ready. The companies we're seeing, John was out in Silicon Valley for 2 days. I live in Northern California. He got excited over 2 days, which is good. But hopefully I've seen a little more in the last 365 than he did in those 2. So just so you know, people are smart. That is really the point about where we are. People are smart. We can do this, but we have to do it. The CEO of BlackRock, Larry Fink, said the next 1,000 unicorns. So a unicorn is a startup that's worth $1 billion. The next 1,000 unicorns will be in climate technology. In 2021, climate tech spending reached 2.5 times pandemic investment levels. So there's $37 billion of funding for startups in climate tech. And as I said, this is just getting revved up. And while I want to talk for 1 second about what it means, like people think innovation, new companies, okay, that's one bucket. Not so. The innovation that's critical to reach our 2050 goals, we're not just talking about new devices, new gadgets, nuclear fusion, green hydrogen. If we wait for those, we are dead. So I talked to someone who, just as an aside, talked to someone who leads a big nuclear fusion company, which people have put in a lot of money at very high valuations. And I said, so what's the upside on nuclear fusion, which I don't know if you guys follow it, but would be a wonderful thing to happen in a lot of ways. He said, if things go, we've really mastered the science. It's an engineering problem now. If things go well, we'll have a working prototype in 2030, and we'll start to have impact in 2040. So we can't wait for nuclear fusion. That's the bottom line. I hope it works. It'll be fantastic. It could be incredibly important. We can't wait for it. We need to deploy the existing technologies now or we will blow our 2030 goals. Because if you think about it, winning slowly, winning late, means that we lose. We have to hit our 2030 goals to hit our 2050 goals. So that means things in the private sector have to work, but the news is the private sector is completely different today on this than it was 2 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 10 years ago. Part of it is policy. You know, I was in Paris, I was in Glasgow. The difference between the two is really, really, really dramatic in terms of what countries understand and what they're promising to do and what they understand has to happen. That's the first change. The second change is global consumers. And you can believe what you want about polls. I hope you're skeptical. But 73% of consumers say they will change what they buy based on climate. Now, do I believe that? No. Most people buy the cheapest, best thing when they walk into a store, just so you know. But do I believe that 20% of consumers will actually live their climate values in their purchasing? Yes, that's actually the number I believe. And that is a powerful number, just so you know. The businesses around the world have changed. You know, John Kerry referred to it, I think, in a nice way. Let me be more accurate. If you look at JP Morgan, the sort of iconic American bank, they basically were the biggest lender to pioneer oil and gas exploration in the world. The biggest. The head of their executive committee was the former chairman and CEO of ExxonMobil. That was then. Now they say they will run their loan book according to the Paris Accords. That's an 180 degrees move. If you look at GM, GM sued my home state of California because the miles per gallon rules were too tough. They've now said they'll be 100% EVs. That's an 180% change. So we're really seeing something different out of the world, and the money's changed. In 2015, just over $2 billion of capital in the US went into ESG, $2 billion. In 2021, it was $120 billion, 48 times more. The money is changing. Next, the costs are different. I don't think people understand that we've had 15 years to work on this. If you look at the cost per kilowatt hour of clean energy versus fossil fuels, we win. And if you're from California, I'm not sure everybody thinks this way, but we think this way. The technology just gets cheaper and more powerful every year. So it's like human beings are smarter than burning rocks. That's our basic philosophy. And that means we will beat them, and once we beat them, we will beat them more every single year. And that's a huge change in terms of getting things adapted. EVs are going to be a lot cheaper than internal combustion cars in a life cycle analysis. A lot cheaper for people to have and to use. The other thing that's happened is there is an explosion of human talent here. I mean, I don't know, looking around this room, there's some people over the age of 30. I'm one of them, to be candid. But we're seeing an explosion of young people who want to be in this business, serial entrepreneurs. We're seeing a level of talent that's critical. And if you think about, we're in this huge struggle to solve a global problem. And what would create an explosion of creativity? A lot of money and a lot of seriously talented people who put their heart and soul into solving the problem. And that's what we're seeing. So when you think about this problem and you think about where we stand, you get the news from the natural world and you go like, oh, grief, that's very tough. But if you get a chance to do what I do, which is to look and see what we can do, there is an ability, and look at this room, of brilliant people who are gonna put everything they have into solving this. And in fact, we can do that. Yeah. I am going to shut up, I promise. But I want to say this. We are not avoiding serious climate consequences. You know, I think there's always this tendency to say, you know, it's tough, but we're gonna win. You know, it's the fourth quarter, we're down 2 touchdowns, but I have a couple of trick plays which really work. That's not true. We're at a point where things are happening in the natural world that are not gonna be reversible, and we're gonna have to deal with, which if we'd been more proactive 15 years ago, wouldn't be true. But it is true. So we're gonna have serious consequences. But we can still build a sustainable, equitable world, free from those unimaginable human sufferings that this crisis does portend. We will have to do this together. This is gotta be a society move. When we were talking about rock concerts, when we're talking about companies, we're talking about the government and private enterprise, this is not getting solved in some back room. When we're talking about the broadest possible coalition ref, this is a society move or it doesn't work. But we can do it if we do it together. We have to do it very, very quickly